If a father missed his own son's entire childhood, does he still deserve forgiveness? Early morning at Westbridge University, the honorary seats were already filled to the brim, and in the shadows, beneath the soft glow of overhead lights, stood a silent man. An old military jacket, a wrinkled invitation. He said nothing, only stepped back. After being quietly turned away from the VIP section, no one knew who he was. But just minutes later, an entire auditorium would rise to their feet. For that very man. Before we begin, please like this video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support gives us the strength to keep sharing powerful, soul-stirring stories like this one. Let's begin. Dawn cast a pale golden light across the campus of Westbridge University, where hundreds of families gathered for the most prestigious commencement ceremony of the year. Flags fluttered along the walkways. The orchestra began to warm up. Photographers wove through the crowd, capturing proud moments between parents and their graduates. Amid the celebration, Malcolm Ward quietly entered through the side gate, unnoticed. He wore an old Marine Corps jacket, its brass buttons dulled with time. Faded jeans, heavy combat boots. In his hand, a handwritten invitation with uneven scrawl. "Dad, I want you in the front row." Jalen. Malcolm wasn't there to boast. He wasn't there to be honored. He came because his son had written those words, and for the first time in nearly a decade, he dared to step into the space where his son had grown up, clinging to a fragile hope that he could still be called Dad. When he reached the VIP seating area, Becca Nguyen, a young usher with an earpiece and a clipboard, stopped him. Her voice was brisk, professional. "Sir, this area is for pre-registered families only. If you don't have a QR code or a guest pass, I'll need you to remain behind the rope." Malcolm didn't speak. He simply held out the small note. Becca glanced at it. A folded piece of paper, no official stamp, no university logo, just a few words in blue ink. She shook her head. "I'm sorry, that's not valid." Behind him, other guests were arriving. Becca turned to wave in a family dressed in crisp suits. Malcolm took a single step back, as if he'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times before. No protest, no anger, just silence, as he tucked the note back into the left breast pocket of his jacket, right over his heart. He made his way to the rear of the auditorium near an exit sign and stood quietly beside a lighting rig, hands folded behind his back. No one asked his name, no one questioned why he was there. But in the fifth row, 6 men in plain clothes sat motionless, eyes fixed on him from the moment he entered. And they knew exactly who he was. Far across the brightly lit auditorium, where every eye was fixed on the main stage, Malcolm Ward stood still, silent, like part of the support column no one needed. No one noticed. The stage lights shone brilliantly on the front rows, on tailored suits and gleaming gowns, but not a single ray reached his slightly hunched back, resting against the cold cement wall. In front of him, a steady stream of honored guests were escorted to the VIP section. Some were major donors, some were government officials, some were simply there because they wore the right colors and spoke the right way. No one asked about Malcolm. No one wondered why a veteran stood alone like a forgotten fixture in the shadows. But Evelyn Carter, a middle-aged woman seated near the middle row, noticed. From the moment he entered through the emergency exit, she sensed something out of rhythm. It was the way he walked, slow but steady. The way he stood, not slouched, not stiff, but as if he was used to being misjudged, and no longer felt the need to explain. And that jacket, worn, faded, but spotless. Evelyn leaned over and asked the person beside her, "Who is he? Why hasn't anyone offered him a seat?" The other shrugged. "Probably, just wandered in." Wandered in. The phrase pierced Evelyn like a thorn in the chest. She turned back to Malcolm. He was now staring straight at the stage, where his son, Jalen Ward, was listed among the distinguished graduates. He didn't lower his head. He didn't fidget. But he also didn't look confident. Only one thing was certain. He didn't feel like he belonged. Across the room, in the fifth row, the 6 men of Pathfinder 6 sat quietly, still watching him. They said nothing, but each one remembered. That man once charged into a firefight first and was always the last to retreat. Not to win, but to save the lives of others. And now here he was, without even a chair, not because no one knew who he was, but because no one believed he deserved to be seen. Malcolm Ward still stood there, not moving forward, not walking away, just a few dozen steps from the stage. But for him, it might as well have been the distance of a lifetime already lost. He could have stepped up. He could have handed over that trembling invitation and said, "I'm Jalen Ward's father." But he didn't, because deep down he wasn't sure he deserved to be called that anymore. 12 years ago, Malcolm came home. A soldier who survived the ambush at Kandahar, while 5 of his closest brothers in arms did not. He had been their commanding officer, the one who stayed back to cover their retreat, the one who screamed into the radio for backup that never came. Since that day, Malcolm turned down every medal, refused every interview, skipped every veteran's ceremony, and he rejected his own role as a father. His wife had passed years before. His son, Jalen, was only 10. But Malcolm couldn't walk back into that house and pretend everything was fine. He couldn't look his son in the eyes without seeing the 5 names he couldn't save. So he vanished. He moved to Brookhaven, took odd jobs at a lumber mill, left no forwarding address. No birthdays, no Christmases, no parent-teacher nights, only silence. A self-imposed sentence without a court. In recent years, Jalen, now in college, began reaching out again. Emails, voicemails, texts. Most went unanswered, and then one day came a handwritten letter. "Dad, I know you think you don't deserve to be a father anymore, but I only ask one thing. On that day, sit in the front row and watch me graduate. You don't have to say anything. Just be there." Malcolm kept that letter like a relic, folded neatly, tucked over his heart. But today, standing at the back of the auditorium, he still didn't move. Because when you've carried guilt for half a lifetime, sometimes being forgiven is scarier than being forgotten. The ceremony began under a soft halo of stage lights and the familiar swell of graduation music. Rows of students in black gowns filed toward the stage. Flashbulbs sparked in 1,000 bursts of pride. Applause rolled like thunder with every name announced. Malcolm Ward stood still beneath the glowing red exit sign. His back straight, hands clasped behind him, eyes fixed on the podium. From the 5th row, 6 men, dressed in plain clothes, but with the posture of men who never stopped standing guard, watched him. They had noticed the moment he entered. They didn't smile. They didn't speak. They just observed, quietly, intently. Then the microphone crackled to life. The keynote speaker, Spencer Langston, son of the university president, stood confidently at center stage, gown immaculate, voice polished. "Let us first honor the families who raised the fine graduates before us today." The crowd burst into applause. Spencer smiled and tilted his head with just enough irony. Especially those parents who came properly dressed with official invitations, seated in our front row VIP section. Laughter rippled through the front rows. A backhanded joke, sharp as glass, cut through the air and grazed Malcolm like a blade. He didn't flinch, didn't scowl, but his eyes dipped ever so slightly, and in his pocket his hand tightened around the folded note. The one Jalen had written in his own handwriting. Still there, but the seat it promised never had his name on it. No one turned to see the man left standing in the shadows. No one knew that the outsider they quietly excluded had once led soldiers into fire to protect the very freedoms they now applauded. Only the 6 men in the 5th row did not clap. They exchanged glances, silent, serious, and ready, because they knew the limit of silence was about to be reached. The cheers and applause rolled on inside the auditorium. But just beyond the reach of the stage lights, Malcolm Ward stood motionless, like a statue carved from resolve and regret, until a voice cut through the shadows, familiar, even mechanical in its precision. "Sir, we've already warned you. Without a guest pass, you cannot remain near this area." It was Officer Reed, campus security, accompanied by Becca and Nguyen, the same event staffer from earlier. Reed wasn't aggressive, but his eyes held no softness, only the trained detachment of someone who'd been told, if they're not on the list, they don't belong. Malcolm didn't argue. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his coat and slowly pulled out the creased envelope. Inside it, a handwritten note in unsteady blue ink, simple, uneven, and achingly sincere. "Dad, I want you to sit in the front row." Jalen, Malcolm held it out. Not as proof of entitlement, but as a final reason to stay. Not for himself, but for a promise made with a boy's trust. Becca glanced at it, shook her head. "No QR code, no official badge. I'm sorry. Handwritten letters don't qualify at a university-sanctioned event." Malcolm nodded. He didn't object, didn't plead, only a flicker passed across his face, as if a part of him agreed with them. That maybe he didn't deserve to stay. Officer Reed lowered his voice, but his tone stayed firm. "I hope you understand, sir. It's policy." Malcolm inhaled deeply, then, with deliberate care, folded the note again, like folding away a piece of his own heart. He took a step back, quietly, without protest, without sound, the way he'd done for years, retreating from his son's life, leaving behind a space he believed he no longer had the right to fill. And once again, he was pushed aside, not by an enemy, but by the very silence he'd trained himself to accept. Only 6 men in row 5 continued watching, and this time, one of them began to rise. Just as Malcolm Ward stepped back, a ripple passed through row 5, a row so unremarkable no one had noticed it. Until now, a tall man in a deep navy ball cap, posture straight, eyes sharp as blades, stood first, then another 3. All 6 men rising without a sound. No one in the auditorium knew who they were. No name tags, no microphones, only their eyes. Eyes that recognized something deeply wrong had just occurred. The first man walked forward toward Malcolm. He stopped face to face with Officer Reed and Becca Nguyen. He didn't scowl. He wasn't angry. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metallic emblem. Shimmering in the amber light of the hall, the Navy SEAL trident, gold and silver, not a medal you could fake, not something you could buy. Then, one by one, the other 5 men followed. Each raised their own trident, not to intimidate, but to testify. The lead man spoke, his voice low but forged in iron. "This man is not leaving this room. He led us through fire, through blood, through places only hell remembers." The room froze. A student taking a selfie lowered his phone. A proud mother, halfway through photographing her daughter's diploma, paused mid-frame. Even the university officials at the front slowly turned, as if realizing for the first time that something more important than a diploma was unfolding. Officer Reed hesitated. Becca stared at the trident, her face draining of color. Malcolm didn't move, didn't raise his head, didn't smile. He simply placed a hand over his heart, where the handwritten invitation still rested, as if to anchor himself. In that moment, none of the 6 men mentioned ranks. No one needed to know their missions or whom they had once fought for. They only turned and stood behind Malcolm, in formation, just like they had once done in war. Because loyalty in their world wasn't granted by protocol, but by the quiet knowing of who had earned it. As the 6 soldiers stood like a silent wall behind Malcolm Ward, a new sound echoed from the right side of the auditorium. The slow, deliberate tap of a cane. An older man in a grey suit, medals pinned neatly to his left breast, rose from the VIP seating. His silver hair was combed immaculately, his gaze sharp, the kind that had seen every shift of battlefield and boardroom. Colonel Thomas Delaney. In the military, his name wasn't spoken with titles. It was spoken with reverence. He stepped up a few stairs, then turned, facing the audience, but his eyes locked on Malcolm, still standing at the back of the hall. "His name," he said, voice ringing without need for a microphone, "is Malcolm Ward." The room fell dead silent. September 2006, Kandahar. I watched this man, with my own eyes, walk back into open fire, to pull 5 of us from a collapsed inferno. No one ordered him to. No one followed. Only one man went in. And in the end, Colonel Delaney paused, a flicker of pain crossing his face. Only he came back out. He removed his glasses, wiped them slowly with a handkerchief. "I'm here today, not as a retired officer. I stand up because that man carried us out when the world had left us for dead. There was no applause, no one dared interrupt. Students, the top graduates of one of the nation's most elite universities, suddenly felt small, in the presence of a man who had walked through fire, not for glory, but to ensure that others could live. Malcolm remained still. He didn't nod. He didn't wave, because honor to him was never something to announce. It was something to live through and carry quietly. And in that moment, every gaze in the auditorium shifted, no longer looking at an old veteran, but at a living symbol of the very honor that graduation speeches so often celebrated, yet so few had ever truly understood. The stage remained still. Colonel Delaney stepped quietly back to his seat, and then, from the rows of graduating students, a young figure stood up, Jalen Ward. The deep-colored gown draped over his slender frame, his graduation cap tilted slightly, tassel trembling with every step. No one introduced him, no name was called. He moved toward the stage, quietly navigating the rows, but his eyes weren't searching for the faculty or cameras. They were looking toward the back of the hall, toward the man who had stood there since the beginning, but had never once been acknowledged. Jalen took the microphone. He didn't sigh. He didn't wait for permission. "Everyone's checking guest lists," he began, his voice steady, low and dry, but not weak. "But I didn't send an email. I wrote a letter. And in that letter, I wrote just one line." He lifted his gaze to the man at the very back of the room. "Dad, I want you to sit in the front row." Malcolm tightened his grip on the card in his hand. The same handwritten card he'd carried all morning and tucked against his heart like a silent talisman. A ripple moved through the auditorium, but Jalen didn't stop. "My father once believed he didn't deserve to be called Dad. After he left the Marines, he chose silence. He chose to withdraw. From birthdays, from first days of school, from my entire life." He paused. One beat. Two. His eyes locked with Malcolm's. Still standing, still silent. But in recent years, he started writing letters. Not apologies, just simple things. Asking if I'd eaten that day. And then, Jalen held up the card. "I sent him this." The room fell utterly still, because I don't need my father to be perfect. I don't need medals or a speech. I just need him present. Somewhere in the room, a breath caught. A woman bowed her head and wiped her eyes. A young man in a graduation gown quietly nodded. "Today, I'm not standing here to honor myself. I'm standing here to say, Dad, I forgive you. And if you're still wondering," Jalen's voice softened, "I want you to know, you were always enough." A wave of applause broke through the room. Not for the speech, but for a father being called back to the place he thought he had lost forever. Malcolm didn't rush forward. He didn't raise a hand in return. He simply stood there, on the line between the shadows of his past mistakes and the light his son had just opened for him. His hand gripped the now creased card, its edges damp with sweat, worn soft by time. But the words, "Dad, I want you to sit in the front row," remained perfectly intact, not because the ink had held up, but because it was the only thing he still believed, gave him permission to exist there. Jalen stepped down from the stage, through aisles of people still too stunned to speak, through glances that hadn't yet caught up, to the weight of what had just happened. He stopped in front of his father, the Marine in a faded jacket with eyes that had seen far too many things no man should have to carry. Without hesitation, Jalen raised his hand in a crisp salute. Right there, in front of the entire auditorium. No one had told him to do it. But no one moved. No one dared speak, because everyone knew what that moment meant. "I forgive you, and I choose you." Malcolm didn't salute back. He didn't snap to attention like the soldier he once was. Instead, he stepped forward and pulled his son into an embrace. Not stiff, not ceremonial, but a trembling, broken, wordless hold. There were no tears, but everyone could see it. For the first time in his life, his shoulders were no longer bracing against the world. As father and son embraced quietly at the back of the auditorium, the 6 men in the 5th row remained standing. No return to their seats, no steps forward, not a single word spoken. They didn't need to do anything. because their presence was the answer among them. One bore scars on his wrist, one walked with a steel brace hidden beneath his pants, another looked like no hero at all, until you saw the seal trident pinned to his chest. They were Pathfinder 6 the men who went through Kandahar with Malcolm, the men who lost brothers, the men Malcolm carried out when no one else dared to go back. And now they stood behind him, not out of protocol, but out of a loyalty that never expired. One stepped forward. The man in the black cap pulled low over his eyes and stopped exactly 3 paces behind Malcolm. No introduction, no explanation. He simply spoke, his voice low and steady, like a gunshot in a quiet night. "Sir, we've never sat down while you were still standing." Jalen looked up, his eyes landing on the silent formation behind his father. And for the first time in his life, he understood his father wasn't just a quiet man, he was someone others would stand behind for the rest of their lives. The silence in the auditorium now was no longer one of indifference, but of awakening. President Harold Langston of Westbridge University stepped slowly onto the stage. The spotlight on his brow trembled slightly. His hand no longer gripped the microphone with authority, and his eyes scanned the crowd until they stopped at Malcolm Ward with Pathfinder 6 standing behind him. He cleared his throat, but his voice came out rough, as if blocked by something far heavier than pride. "Today we have an honored guest among us, a man whom this very system, mine, ours, turned away." The entire auditorium fell still. The microphone was no longer a tool of power, but an instrument of reckoning. "Mr. Malcolm Ward, we owe you an apology. Not for failing to recognize you sooner, but for living in a world where pre-printed guest lists mattered more than those who wrote history in their own blood." A hesitant round of applause broke the silence, soft from the back row. Then it began to spread. Not thunderous, just enough. Enough to say the truth had just been spoken. President Langston bowed his head, so deeply that his academic cap nearly slipped from his crown, not bowing to Malcolm, but to the integrity his school had denied only moments before. From the 5th row, Evelyn Carter clutched her graduation program tightly. She exhaled as if something in her heart had finally been unburdened. President Langston's apology still lingered in the air when something quietly remarkable began to happen. The front row, the same one that had rejected Malcolm Ward that very morning, began to shift. No one said a word, no one gave an order, yet every person seated there slowly rose and stepped aside, leaving a single seat empty. Dead center, right along the main aisle, Becca Nguyen, the event staffer who had turned him away earlier, still held the clipboard in her hands. She looked at the seat, then at Malcolm. Her eyes were no longer official, no longer filtered through policy, only human, and filled with the quiet ache of wanting to make things right. Malcolm stood still for a long moment, not because he hesitated, but because the legs that once carried others through gunfire now felt heavy at the edge of crossing a far more personal battlefield, between who he was and who he dared to become again. Jalen said nothing. He simply nodded, gently, enough to say, "I still want you in the front row, just like I wrote." And Malcolm stepped forward. One step, then another, slow but steady. No one blocked him. No one asked for ID. No barriers remained. Only respect, parting to let him through. He sat down in the seat once denied him, back straight, hands resting on his knees, no smile, no tears, just a single breath. His first true exhale of the entire ceremony, as if reclaiming a place that had been stolen long ago by too much silence. Behind him, Pathfinder 6 remained standing, tall as monuments. No one needed to ask them to sit. They knew, where we once followed this man, we stand behind him still. Not out of duty, but because of belief. From the 5th row, Evelyn Carter swallowed hard, tears sliding down her cheek unnoticed, because she knew this was not a seat of honor. This was a seat finally returned, to the man it always belonged to. The graduation ceremony continued as if it had never been interrupted. But the air was no longer the same. Every name called, every round of applause, now carried a different weight. This was no longer just a celebration of achievement, but a quiet reckoning, a moment when a community realized who truly belonged. Malcolm Ward sat silently in the front row. He didn't lift his chin, didn't beam with pride, but the calm strength in his posture made the entire row sit a little straighter. Jalen sat beside him, saying nothing, not even reaching over, but every now and then he'd glance sideways, just to make sure the man was really there. Not in memory, not in the hazy past of a distant childhood, but here, present, real, no longer absent. When the final diplomas were handed out, the students began walking off stage, filing past the front row where Malcolm sat. Some only gave a nod. Some paused to grip his hand. One former student, eyes red, stopped, stood at attention, and whispered, "Thank you for bringing my squadmate home." Malcolm didn't reply, he only nodded. The kind of nod that belongs to men who've done the right thing all their lives, without needing applause. From the back, Evelyn Carter watched without taking a single note. She understood. No speech could capture this. No banner could honor it. Just a father, once absent, quietly received back by presence alone. No one had to say, "I forgive you, Dad." No one needed to hear, "I'm sorry, son." But the entire auditorium understood, as Evelyn later wrote, "There are forms of forgiveness that don't come through words, but through the simple act of showing up and staying." Malcolm Ward remained seated in the front row. He didn't need to speak. He didn't need an introduction. His presence alone made everything feel complete. As the final graduates left the stage, one man from Pathfinder 6 stepped forward, emerging from the shadows of the columns. He was the youngest in the group, perhaps the one Malcolm had carried out of fire. When he was barely 19 or 20, he said nothing. He simply bowed, deeply, reverently, then placed a small object into Malcolm's hand. A coin, round, smooth, its edges worn just enough to hint at the weight it carried. One side gleamed with the raised emblem of the SEAL Pathfinder unit, etched like a scar that had once seen fire. The other side bore 5 words, deeply engraved, "The quiet ones lead the loudest wars." There was no medal, no drum roll, no ceremony, just a message from the men who once followed him into battle, returning now to say, "We remember." Malcolm turned the coin in his palm. No tears came, but for the first time in many years, his shoulders dropped ever so slightly, as if the burden in his chest had finally found somewhere to rest. The coin wasn't made of gold, but to Malcolm Ward, it weighed like a lifetime. As the final notes of the music faded and the grounds of Westbridge University began to empty, Evelyn Carter remained seated. She looked around, petals scattered across the stone benches, name tags left behind on the VIP seats, graduation gowns fluttering like lost sails in the evening breeze. At the front row, Malcolm Ward still sat beside Jalen. No cameras clicked, no spotlights lingered, no applause echoed. Just a father who once stood at the very edge of the room, now sitting where they once said he didn't belong, not because he fought, not because he shined, but because he dared to return, and because one son reached out and welcomed him back. Evelyn rose slowly. She passed by Becca, the young woman who'd turned Malcolm away that morning. Now standing still, head bowed, gripping her clipboard as if it weighed 100 pounds. Evelyn didn't look at her. She kept her gaze forward, toward the place where old wounds had been forgiven. Not through words, but through presence. And she understood. Some fathers never need a podium. They only need a place beside their child. And to be called by the right name, at the right time. When Malcolm rose beside Jalen, the two walking quietly away from the front row together, no one said a word, but everyone knew. He never had to earn back that place. It had been his from the very beginning. Not every father is perfect. Some have failed, stepped back, or stayed silent for far too long. But love, when it's real, finds its way back, no matter how late. Malcolm Ward didn't rise to be applauded. He rose because, for the first time in years, someone called him by bond, not by rank. And Jalen, his son who didn't need a hero, just needed his father to show up, sit down and stay. We can't rewrite the past, But sometimes a single empty seat, filled at the right moment, can mend an entire lifetime of silence. If you've ever been distant from someone you love, if you've ever thought, "I don't deserve to come back," remember this. No one is born perfect, but everyone deserves a place beside the one they love, if they dare to return.